Hello there, everyone. I'm Meteorologist Addison Green here at KHOU, based in the Houston, Texas area. In case you're watching us from outside the United States, abroad, across, and maybe perhaps our neighbor to the north in Canada, across the Caribbean islands, or anywhere where you're viewing this perhaps on YouTube. Diving in towards the Atlantic tropical update on this Tuesday afternoon, in which case we are talking about tropical storms Peter, Rose, as well as Invest 98L that does have a chance of strengthening within the next few days. So here's the latest we got for you. Tropical storm Peter is struggling as it moves north of Puerto Rico and west of the Bahamas. Tropical storm Rose, though, has several issues going on that's keeping it from strengthening and developing. It's got Saharan dust, wind shear, as well as convection rather lopsided from its center of circulation. Invest 98L will become our next named storm in a few days. There's no question about that, but there is no threat to land yet, and we'll show you those forecast details in just a moment. But the next name on the list is Sam, after we have crossed off Peter and Rose, and we did have Odette about a week or so ago, and that system is still kind of hanging on. At least it's kind of like shadowy, ghost-like figure. I'll show you what I'm talking about in just a second. But as we make our way in towards the end of September, we'll slowly start to see less and less activity popping on up until we get towards a little bit of a peak right there in October, and then we start to go more of a downward decline heading in towards the end of the season, which around November 30th comes our way. Now, looking out towards October, since we're just a few days away from the new month, the typical October tracks for tropical systems have them popping up across near the Bahama Islands, as well as in the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, and likely we are seeing those prevailing tracks of those tropical systems going up towards the north and northeasterly direction, no matter where they form in this highlighted area, which the orange is most likely favorable conditions for seeing those storms to develop. Sure, you'll get a couple that form in the Gulf of Mexico, may drift up this way, but the general consensus is saying that on average we'll see them moving up in this direction, and we'll talk about why before this video is done, where we see those tropical systems go. Now, as we look across the big board, we got Peter and Rose, of course, we're keeping our eyes on, so is the National Hurricane Center. When I mentioned the ghostly shadow remnants of Odette, it's this system right here that we had Odette form about a week or so ago, just off the northeast coastal areas, and it lasts for about 36 to 48 hours before it started transition from a warm core, which is where tropical systems are, towards a cold core. When they start to get those tropical characteristics fading away, they start to gain frontal boundaries because tropical systems don't have any, like a cold front, a warm front, or cooler front. So extratropical means they're starting to get that growth and development of those fronts, and they start to get some dry air getting embedded in their central circulation. We can see right there that there is certainly a little remnant circulation hanging out right where that X is, but we're going to be seeing it maybe moving towards slightly favorable conditions in the next 2 to 5 days, hence that 40% chance. But either way, this systems across the North Atlantic. It'll eventually get picked up by the jet streams, that river of air that moves systems around the planet, and carried northward in towards perhaps the east coast of Greenland, Iceland, or maybe in towards northern portions of Europe near Scandinavia. Now, this one of high concern right there is Invest 98L, and it has a 90% chance of development in the next 2 to 5 days. It's 60% in the next 48 hours. But X marks the spot on where that system is located, and this is the area that will likely see growth and development into either a tropical depression or a tropical storm. Now, Tropical Storm Peter has winds sustained of 40 miles per hour, and yesterday at the same time frame it had 45 miles per hour sustained wind. So it has weakened a little bit as it's moving towards a west-northwesterly direction, nearly at 10 miles per hour. As we look at the satellite radar imagery, the infrared imagery right here, we can see that we do have a closed area of circulation, at least looking at the surface streamlines right here, those surface winds, but the convection of this system is all on one quadrant of the system. If you were to cut this thing into fours right there, you're going to see that most of it's displaced on towards one of those quadrants right there, and that's out there towards the southeastern portion of the system, which is where they should not be seeing convection. It should be all around if you're seeing a strengthening, developing tropical system. Well, the reason why the bulk of that convection is over on that one side of the storm is because we got two upper areas of pressure helping to kind of funnel that moisture, that convection, away from the center of circulation. So we're looking at the water vapor imagery, which is kind of like an X-ray scan of the atmosphere where we can see tropical moisture, or at least abundant moisture, as well as dry air. Dry air is just going from the brown to orange shade of colors. moisture is going from the white to the blue to eventually orange. And we can see that here we have a counterclockwise swirl in the atmosphere. That's an area of low pressure up aloft. And then we have a bigger area of pressure, high pressure, over towards the east, moving that air around in a clockwise fashion. Well, you can see both of them are helping to funnel that moisture right up between those two, but it's taking away from the center of circulation, that core of Peter, and it's kind of getting exposed. We also have some dry air that the system is running into it right there, so it's got multiple factors going against it, hence why it weakened in the past 24 hours. As we follow the track of Peter, taken away from Puerto Rico and eventually away from the Bahama Islands, it's going to be moving towards a northeasterly direction over time and weaken down towards a tropical depression and then eventually perhaps a remnant low as it makes its way now southeast of Bermuda. Yesterday when I showed you this graphic, we had that center line of where that track would be going right in towards Bermuda, but now we have seen that those upper level winds will prevail, helping to kind of pull it towards the east, and that's the general direction we see these tropical systems move. They tend to move towards the northeasterly direction due to the Coriolis effect, which is what we see happen on this side of the planet in the northern hemisphere. When you go down towards the southern hemisphere, things get deflected to the opposite direction. Northern hemisphere gets deflected towards the right side, and that's what we typically do find these systems wanting to go through, is that forward motion. It's just a question of, do we have all the factors in there to make those systems go that direction, or do we find some reason why they are moving towards the northwesterly direction? Say it's an upper level cutoff low helping to yank them towards the west, or it's an upper level high pressure helping to push them along down in towards the Gulf of Mexico. Tropical storm Rose is making her way across the Atlantic Ocean. Let me step out of the way for you. We can see that we do have a few islands right there. Those are the Cabo Verde Islands. That little bit of landmass right there on the side of your screen, that is the west coast of Africa. So this system is several thousand miles away from the Caribbean as well as the United States. And it also looks like its convection is a few miles away from its center of circulation. We can see right there is where we do have that center of circulation of Rose. And yesterday when I showed you this video, we had that convection pretty much towards the center of it and also towards the western side, a big ball convection. But I mentioned how it was struggling to keep that convection and getting it firing up continuously. Well, now that convection for the most part has kind of faded away, and we just see it on one portion of the storm and getting carried away towards a northeasterly direction. Well, also, like we saw with Peter, we got to look at the upper level winds. We can see that we do have a area of high pressure just to the east-southeast of it, bringing in that flow of air around it in a clockwise fashion. There's also another area of high pressure to the west, also doing that same motion, air going around in a clockwise fashion. We do have a trough. It's digging down and up across the central portion of the Atlantic Ocean, and that's where we do have between that trough and the area of high pressure this northwesterly flow of wind coming on down, riding right in towards the system. And that's why we've seen the bulk of that moisture being displaced, and it's being carried away, courtesy of the trough and the area of high pressure, towards the east-northeasterly direction away from the center of circulation. That's where all this moisture is right here. That's all from what was right around the center of circulation of Rose, but it's being completely displaced and kind of thinned out. It's being carried away from those upper level winds aloft. 250 millibar level winds, which is 34,000 feet in altitude, pretty much the same altitude that you find commercial jetliners flying around. And also, Rose is running in towards some drier air, or at least less moisture-laden air, so that's also not helping to keep itself together. And when you toss in some Saharan dust, we got multiple factors keeping the system from getting its act together, which is it's a good thing. We don't want these systems to strengthen and grow and develop into monster major hurricanes. We like them to kind of pop up where they do pop up, because that's just the nature of how weather works. You get these systems popping on up, but fading away and not impacting any land masses, thereby not impacting any people. But we do have that Saharan dust being blown off the African continent, coming on down across towards this west-southwesterly direction, and then moving right up across in towards Rose's vicinity and just hanging around. So yeah, got multiple reasons why this system is likely not long for this world, as it eventually travels towards a northwesterly direction, weakening down towards a tropical depression, and then by Friday into Saturday, weakening down towards a remnant low, moving over cooler waters of the north-central Atlantic Ocean, and then fading away, with some of that moisture being transported up in towards perhaps the Canary Islands, or maybe up towards the Azores, which is right about here, or maybe even going towards Portugal or Spain. But at that point, we're just getting string of tropical moisture coming on in, not an organized tropical system. Now, speaking of tropical systems, we have one that's trying to get itself together and more organized, and that's Tropical Wave Invest 98L. It's got winds sustained of 30 miles per hour. It's moving to the west at 17. Pressure is at 1010 millibars. Yesterday, we had a little more convection on the north side as well as the west side of the system, but we've seen that west-southwesterly side kind of weaken and kind of back down a little bit. Meanwhile, the north is still firing on up. So it is running into a little bit of some issues, mainly in terms of some Saharan dust that is coming on down up across from the African continent over this way. It's kind of choked some of that convection trying to develop around the center of circulation. But as we look forward in time over the next 7 to 10 days, looking at the various spaghetti plots, the computer models that all the meteorologists look at to see where systems go, whether they're tropical, winter, or whatever, all across the planet. And we have the various computer models right here, all in agreement that over the next 1 to 5 days, this system will be traveling towards a west-northwest direction. It's pretty much a general consensus right there. Once you get towards day 5, through day 7, now we start to see some discrepancies coming on, and that is natural. As you look further out in time, you're going to find more variables popping on up, making more issues of a concern. You got to look at each one of those variables popping on up. And as you get towards 7 to 10 days from now we do have a lot of those models disagreeing where the system will go. Hence, there's a wide swath from over in towards Venezuela all the way up in towards the north portions of the central Atlantic, where we can see any one of these models possibly being the one that we see this system eventually go on that track. I do want to highlight a few of them. There's about 30% of these models that want to take it in towards the Leeward Islands, towards, say, Guadeloupe, Martinique, the U.S. Virgin Islands, British Virgin Islands, over in towards the Caribbean as well. The rest of those models, about 65–70%, want to have a curve towards our north-northeasterly direction and possibly go completely towards a north-northeasterly direction out to sea. So we are hoping that is going to be the general track as we see the system move forward in time. But we're going to look at two of our long-range models, the American model in yellow, the European model in red, tracking Invest 98L, where eventually it will start to get itself organized and eventually become a named storm. Next name on the list is Sam. So the European model by Wednesday afternoon has a closed area circulation. Meanwhile, the GFS, the American model, does not, still has a very much open wave right there. So they disagree right there in terms of where we will see this system with intensity, but they pretty much agree on timing and location and where it will be. As we move forward past Thursday and towards eventually Friday afternoon, now we see both models having this system becoming an organized system. We have concentric isobars right there, areas of closed circulation starting to develop towards the center of circulation. And what we are starting to see is that these are both coming into agreement in where the system will be. By Friday afternoon, pretty much equidistant between the Leeward Islands as well as Africa, the African continent. As we move in towards this upcoming weekend and then eventually in towards Sunday morning, now we still have the two models rather in agreement in where the system will be, inching closer towards the Leeward Islands, maybe about 800–900 miles away or so, give or take. But both are in agreement that the system will strengthen and grow and develop. We see more isobars, closed concentric circles right there, indicating that it's strengthening and deepening. And at this point, you probably have a strong tropical storm or maybe a Category 1 or Category 2 hurricane on your hands. As we move forward in towards the early portion of next week, now we start to see, as we go further in time, more disagreements on where the system will go. The European model wants to have it going in towards the U.S., potentially British Virgin Islands, while the American model in yellow wants to curve towards a north-northeasterly direction. Both are in agreement that this system will continue to strengthen and develop as we possibly see it going up in categories, maybe Category 2 or Category 3 or maybe even a 4 as you get towards Tuesday afternoon. But either way, the northern portion of the Leeward Islands need to be on alert by the time we get in towards this weekend for potentially dealing with a very strong tropical system coming their way. And even if it doesn't, it's always a good idea to be prepared. Now, when I mentioned earlier about systems kind of making their way in towards the October season, the October month, I should say, and getting picked up and moved away from the United States, it's because we start to see the jet stream, that river of air aloft that steers storms around the planet, starting to buckle and starting to push further southward as we're starting to transition seasons from summer to winter. During the summer season, the jet stream is pushed way up to the north of the U.S.-Canadian border, going in towards the Hudson Bay area, perhaps, pushing in towards the Yukon territories over there, or the Northwest Territories, I should say. But as we make our way in through September and towards October, we start to see it buckle and get pushed southward. As it does so, we can see cold air locked up behind the jet stream starting to sink southward, down and across towards portions of the Central Plains, for instance, the Northern Plains. And as these jet stream buckles push southward, we're starting to get a transition of air masses, in which case you're starting to see a cold front pop on up. Now, when these cold fronts and these buckles in the jet streams, these troughs appear, they will move down to the south and move towards the east. But they can also help to pick up any tropical activity that's in Florida's area, for instance, or just up towards the northeastern portion of the Gulf of Mexico, getting picked up and pushed. It's almost like a deflector right there, pushing up towards the northeasterly direction. So that's some good news that as we make our way through the second half of the tropical season, there's a good chance tropical activity will get displaced from the United States and from portions of the northern Caribbean islands as we watch these troughs and cold fronts move on in across the area. As we move our way in towards Saturday afternoon, here we have another trough digging down towards the mid-Atlantic states of the United States, and we'll be seeing its associated cold front with it starting to push any activity up ahead of it up towards the northeasterly direction as we have a ridge of high pressure building on in behind it. But as we move forward in towards October, November, we'll be tracking the jet stream as we'll be tracking where the cold air is and where it may be entering North America, because we usually go out there towards Siberia, for instance, or up towards the Arctic Circle, seeing where that Arctic air mass is and seeing if we have any instances where it gets dislodged or a piece of it gets dislodged, gets sent down southward, in which case we could maybe see portions of the United States and portions of Canada, maybe even portions of Mexico, getting a big blast of chilly air coming on down, in which case we're talking about maybe Arctic outbreaks, blizzards, or just even winter storms developing if they're in the right conditions. So that's why as we make our way through the tropical season and in towards the colder months of the year, make sure you stay tuned right here at KHOU. We'll continue to give you updates along with the changing seasons as we watch these fronts dive on down, usher in some cooler, drier conditions in several spots, and then potentially as we go in towards the winter months that we're talking about winter weather, winter storms, blizzards, and the likes of it impacting millions of people. Speaking of transitions, we are transitioning from summer to autumn as we go past today, this Tuesday, in towards Wednesday, and we are having, very fitting, a cold front sliding on in across the United States, transitioning the air masses as we are replacing very warm, muggy air up ahead of it with cooler, drier air behind it. And typically when you do have this transition of air masses, it's a chaotic event that does happen, so you will get a little bit of some energy being displaced in the form of perhaps some scattered showers or thunderstorms, depending upon how sharp of a contrast we have between the two air masses. If you have a very warm, very muggy air mass being replaced by a very cold, very dry air mass shoving on in, yeah, that contrast right there creates conflict, and that's where we could get potential thunderstorms to develop, and then more extreme situations, severe weather to develop. And there are some spots in the country that are dealing with severe weather for the day today like they did yesterday. But like I mentioned, we're transitioning the season, so the first day of autumn comes our way tomorrow with the autumnal equinox, and that's where we do see Central Time, at least 2:20 p.m. fall arriving tomorrow, September 22nd. And the equinox means when we are dealing with the planet eventually starting to pivot away from the sun, getting those indirect lights, rays of light, I should say, coming towards the northern hemisphere, but we are tilting away from the sun. But as we're going towards that portion in December, when we enter into winter solstice, we have to see that transition first of the axis of the Earth going from tilting towards the sun to being equidistant, pretty much perpendicular right there. And that's where we do have that sun directly over the equator, and that's where we get the name equinox. It's Latin for equal nights, and that's what we do typically find around this time of the year, portions of the world getting equal time of day and night, relatively around 12 hours for each portion of the day. And then eventually, as we start to make our way past this point, we're starting to see the northern hemisphere being tilted away from the sun. We'll have more direct sunlight going towards the southern hemisphere, where they are dealing with their temperatures rising, going in towards spring and summer, and up in towards the northern portion of the hemisphere, we are going in towards winter eventually. But as we start to wrap things up here in this video, we are going to be dealing with the breakdown right here for you. Some final thoughts. Tropical storm Peter and Rose will struggle to keep themselves together, but still will kick up rough wave activity. Invest 98L will become Sam in a few days, and interest in the Caribbean need to keep a close eye. And closer to the United States, the Gulf of Mexico and as well as the offshore waters of the East Coast are both quiet, but we're watching early October for development down towards the southern end of the Gulf of Mexico and in towards the western portion of the Caribbean. Any thoughts, questions, concerns, feel free to reach out on social media. Here are all my social media handle accounts, and we'll be back tomorrow with another weather update here at KHOU. Have a good day.